This isn't really an economics lesson, not in the way you might think. This is the story of a society coming completely apart at the seams. It's about a time when the very idea of money, something we all just assume works, simply stopped.
Just try to imagine that for a second. Not a stock market crash, not a recession. No, this was a complete failure of the one tool we invented to measure value. One day, the paper in your pocket was worth something, and the next, it was just paper.
And this is the part that's so hard to wrap your head around. The country was still full of skilled workers, running factories, and plenty of goods. The people themselves weren't destitute. But the money, the very thing they used to trade their time and their goods, it was the thing that had become poor, utterly worthless.
Now take a look at this. This isn't some kind of joke or a collector's item. It's a real token from November of 1923. For 1 single pound of bread, you'd need 3 billion marks. You wanted a glass of beer? That'll be 4 billion, please. This is exactly what it looks like when numbers completely lose their meaning.
And if you want to understand the sheer absurdity of it all, this is it. Think about it. Criminals, whose entire business is stealing things of value, figured out that the container was worth more than the cash inside. When a simple leather suitcase is more valuable than what could have been a person's entire life savings, you know the system has fundamentally broken. So, how on earth did it get to this point?
All right, let's start to pull back the layers here, because a catastrophe this big doesn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding collapse of the single most important ingredient in any economy: trust. See, at its very core, that's all money really is. It isn't the paper, it's not the metal. It's a collective belief system. It's a story we all agree to tell ourselves. It's a promise. And the second we stop believing in that promise, the story ends. The paper just becomes paper again. And the story of the Weimar Republic is the story of that belief completely evaporating. So the story starts to unravel right after World War I. Germany is on its knees, crushed by the crippling war reparations demanded by the Treaty of Versailles. For a short time, things seemed to stabilize. But then came the final bill, the London Ultimatum. The government was backed into a corner, completely desperate, and it made a decision that would change everything. It turned on the printing presses to try and pay its massive debts. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's easy to point the finger at the reparations, and they were a huge burden, no doubt, but they weren't the whole story. They became a convenient excuse, but a huge portion of the deficit, well, that was caused by internal policies. So this crisis was born from both immense external pressure and a series of disastrous internal decisions. This wasn't just something that happened to Germany. In many ways, it was something Germany did to itself. And that combination of internal and external pressure created this deadly feedback loop. Once the printing really started, it became impossible to stop. And the speed of the final collapse, well, it was nothing short of breathtaking. Just look at this chart. For years, the line just kind of bumps along the bottom. And then, in 1923, it just goes vertical. It is the literal visual definition of off the charts. This isn't just inflation. This is a monetary supernova. The value of the mark didn't just fall, it plunged into a black hole. And this is what that supernova actually looked like in people's hands. Things were moving so fast, the government couldn't even print new banknotes. They had to take old, now totally useless 1,000 mark notes and just stamp 1 billion right over the top. A little while later, even that wasn't enough, and 50 million mark notes became the kind of thing you just have rattling around in your pocket. Daily life just became completely surreal. You'd get paid in the morning and have to literally run to the store because by the afternoon, your wages might be worth half as much. People used banknotes to wallpaper their homes because it was actually cheaper than buying real wallpaper. The shared story of money was over. Society just reverted to its most basic form of exchange, bartering. A lump of coal for a cinema ticket. Anything tangible was better than holding on to what some bitterly called Jew confetti, that worthless paper. And at the absolute peak, in late 1923, this was the exchange rate. 4.2 trillion marks for a single US dollar. It's a number so huge, our brains can't even really process it. The currency wasn't just dead, it was a ghost. So how do you possibly come back from that? How do you rebuild an entire economic system when you're starting from absolute zero? Well, the answer turns out to be just as much about psychology as it is about economics. But before we even get to the solution, we have to understand the human cost. Because this hyperinflation didn't just destroy money, it wiped out an entire social class. The middle class, people who had worked their whole lives, saved responsibly, planned for their futures. They saw everything they had built turn to dust overnight. All the virtues they believed in, like thrift and hard work, suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. The end, when it came, was incredibly abrupt. First, they finally did the one thing they had refused to do. They stopped the printing presses. Then, they introduced a grand new currency, the Rentenmark. Now, officially, its value was based on land and industrial goods, but honestly, that was secondary. The real magic was just that it was new. It was a clean break from the past. It was a chance for people to start believing in the story of money all over again. And that trauma, it never really went away. The memory of 1923 is literally baked into the German national psyche. It helps explain this deep-seated cultural fear of inflation and an intense desire for financial stability that still shapes German and even European policy to this very day. It was a scar, a lesson learned in the hardest way imaginable. Which really brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? The printing presses were the weapon, there's no doubt about that. But was that the actual cause, or was it just a symptom? Maybe the real disease, the real point of failure, was the moment the German people and the rest of the world simply stopped believing in the promise written on that little piece of paper. So I'll leave you with this. Was the collapse caused by printing money or by losing trust? And what happens when any of us stop believing in the stories we tell ourselves?